We haven't mentioned the player that effectively destroyed the AJPEX a few years back. He's 32 this year, though, guys. Should dynasty managers be acquiring him?
My general rule of thumb on these age guys is that I'm probably the low guy on most of them when they are at or around the age apex. I'm probably the high guy on those who survive long enough to be multiple years past the age apex. Look how fast it happened to like a Cooper Kupp or a Tyreek Hill, where they almost went from right at the age apex to, whoa, they might not be so good anymore, to they have no fantasy value whatsoever.
He's one of the first names that I'm searching up and seeing if we can get something done with the roster he's on. He is a harder one to get, though, I will say. He is much more often, much more likely on the rosters that are already totally stacked.
It is absolutely worth an ask. Which old guys should dynasty managers be acquiring this offseason? Theo Greminger, Jakob Sanderson, and Ryan Heath. Fantasy Points Dynasty YouTube. Another Dynasty YouTube-only exclusive content. And guys, we're talking about older players. And I think to put it, a little rule here, every player we're talking about is going to be at least 29 years old. Two of the three players we are going to be talking about today are in that dreaded 30-plus range. But guys, the market seems ripe for this. Last couple of years, we've been seeing some older guys scoring at a very high margin. I'll quick question before we get started. Jakob, do you care about the age apex anymore, or is it a little changed for you after the last few years?
Well, my view on the age apex has always been it's more of a risk factor. It's not a rule. It's not a mountain that you gradually climb up to and descend from. I mean, most of this is borrowed from the research of Adam Harstad. My general rule is that once you hit the quote unquote age apex at your position, we basically just need to bake in a little bit of risk that you're going to go to dust. And that risk just kind of increases each year. But until I've seen actual signs of decline from a player, I'm not building in that as the base case. So for me, it's sort of, if I've seen you be good quite recently in your most recent season, my expectation is going to be that that's your most likely outcome, is to continue to perform roughly at that level with a little bit of risk baked in that I wouldn't give to other players who are a few years younger. And then once I start to see that decline in the efficiency numbers, at either position, that's when I tend to get on high alert and I tend to bail on those older players. But I'm actually usually pretty optimistic, especially in Dynasty, on players that are older but are still performing at a really high level.
Ryan Heath, you are a noted ageist in the fantasy football community, a person who always is fading the olds. Are you starting to evolve a little bit? The last couple of years, there's been a couple of guys here, Ryan, that you wish you could have a little bit of a do-over. Are we back in the fading the old guys in 2026, or is it case by case for you?
Specifically for Dynasty, I think you are almost always getting an appropriate age discount at this point. I think the industry has gotten much more woke to the risks of age over the past 5 years, certainly, but especially the past 2 or 3 years since I kind of did my big in-depth age research. So yeah, I take a fairly similar approach to what Jakob just outlined. If a guy is past the age apex but is still performing, especially if you're getting like that nice uncertainty discount in the ADP, in the dynasty cost, what have you, yeah, I don't really have any issues paying for them, especially if it's a roster that is aligned in the sense that it's a roster that benefits from having older guys with discounted production on it. In redraft might be a little bit different. I do think there's genuine like ceiling concerns with some of the older guys, but hey, I mean, I was in on Devontae Adams last year. Like, there are definitely spots even in redraft that you can pick, and I think you can benefit from kind of diving into the perceived risk of older guys.
Yeah, I think you both had some awesome points here. I think that you nailed it, Ryan. It's all the price, and in Dynasty, you're always getting a significant discount, and we're finding players that are usable players that can help us win, especially if we're willing to take that risk with some of these older players. Jakob, why don't you get us started? Your player is very much in the news. Some recent developments with this player have created a lot of optimism in the streets, especially with you.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about David Montgomery, and it's a little bit uncertain where his price will eventually fall. We're only a couple days into receiving the trade news, but Just from sort of scanning the timeline, I found myself pretty high on the optimist end of the spectrum in terms of what I'm expecting from him this year, which when we're talking about targeting players that are older in Dynasty, that's really what our focus is. What are they going to be scoring for us this year? He's going to go into the Houston Texans situation, and I've seen varying opinions of how this is going to play out. My view is they've invested quite a ton in this backfield. They traded a 2026 third to go get Woody Marks last year. They traded now a fourth and a player and a seventh to go and add David Montgomery at this point. That's kind of value that's almost equivalent to like a second round pick in this backfield. And they did it with Montgomery under contract as well that they're going to have to pay. So I would be honestly surprised if they made another running back investment in this upcoming draft that was more than marginal. And I'm expecting this backfield to mostly be Montgomery versus Marks. And I think Marks is really an overrated issue for David Montgomery or for anyone, frankly. I think that the community tends to have a lot of respect for players who earn playing time as rookies and accumulate fantasy production. But if you actually just go through what Marks was able to accomplish, it wasn't much. I wrote a recent column on my expectations for basically every team in the NFL's running back depth chart going into free agency. And I included a bunch of the advanced metrics I look at. And Marks was below average among qualifying backs in basically every single metric in both the rushing and the receiving game, from a success rate perspective, from an explosiveness, missed tackles, yards per route run. If you can name it, Marks was falling below what you want to see. He was a major fantasy points over expectation underperformer last season as well. And as a prospect, he wasn't someone that to me ever showed much as a rusher. I thought he was at best a satellite or third down back who was overdrafted. Now you bring in David Montgomery, and this is a team that is frankly not prioritized explosiveness at the running back position. It's a team that was happy to go and trade for Joe Mixon 2 years ago. It was a team that targeted Marks in the draft and targeted Nick Chubb in free agency last year. I think that what they want more than anything is sort of a reliable bruiser at the running back position. And I think David Montgomery is that. He saw his workload curtailed in recent seasons due to Jahmyr Gibbs' emergence as one of the best players, frankly, in the National Football League. But he was still 13th in yards after contact per attempt among running backs last year. He was 11th in rush yards over expectation per attempt among running backs. His overall profile to me is fine. And I think his receiving profile and 3-down upside is underrated because of how good Jahmyr Gibbs has been. So I honestly would forecast David Montgomery to see like 250 carries this year and probably another 50 targets. I think he can do basically what Joe Mixon did in 2024, which was a big hit in the running back dead zone. In Dynasty, I would be willing to pay in more online, ageist, anti-running back leagues a mid to late second round pick. If I was in like a home league and I had to pay an early second round pick, I would do that as well, especially in the 2026 class.
I love it. I think that your Joe Mixon parallels are spot on. They sort of have a type. Go back to David Johnson years and years ago. Houston just gets these guys that have been on other teams, had great success, and they get what they can out of them, and then they'll reset it. And agreed with you completely on your Woody Marks takes as well. Ryan, anything to add with the David Montgomery trade?
Yeah, I think my favorite part about going out and targeting David Montgomery in Dynasty right now is that he's really the only card that has flipped over. In the next few weeks, we're going to get free agency, we're going to get the draft. There are a ton of players right now where their value kind of in this mid-range of running back is going to be very dependent on what happens in early March, in April, what these backfields look like going into the summer. I agree completely with Jacob. I think the Texans have shown their hand at this point, and that you can pretty safely pencil David Montgomery in as the presumptive lead back for the Texans, just based on what they had to give up to go acquire him. And we don't know that about so many of these other running backs at this point. So yeah, this is kind of the perfect time in terms of if you're a contender that is looking to flip draft capital for points in 2026. Montgomery's just the easiest way to go because there is just an actual baseline here, and I don't think that mentally people are going to quite be there. I don't know that the value you're going to have to give up for him is going to reflect the idea that, oh yeah, he's locked into the backfield. I think people are still kind of in the mode this time of year of, oh, I'm skeptical of any running back that is not like an elite player that's locked into a long-term deal or whatever. But yeah, with Montgomery, at least for this year, it seems he's just like the first guy that we have learned is going to get a workload essentially.
Yeah, and we're going to be covering free agency on this channel as well as Fantasy Points YouTube. Make sure you're checking it out. We're actually going live on Fantasy Football Daily on Monday. Scott Barrett, Brett Whitefield, and myself for Legal Tampering Day. That should be a fun one. Make sure you check that one out on Fantasy Points YouTube. And if you want access to more of our Dynasty information, including our updated Dynasty rankings, make sure you're checking out fantasypoints.com. You can use the code DYNASTY and get 10% off any package. Back at it. This is my player. Let's talk about Terry McLaurin, guys. This is like what a difference a year makes. A year ago, there were multiple Dynasty teams buying Terry McLaurin. This was a hot player to add. He was coming off of a career year. Jaden Daniels' mania was completely in the Dynasty streets. Daniels was the QB1 overall in a lot of Dynasty startups, and McLaurin was getting tied in with him. And talking about the redraft marketplace, Terry McLaurin was a 3-4 turn pick in FFPC main events pretty much throughout the summer before he had a holdout. So Terry McLaurin, to me, there's nothing that's really changed from what we saw in 2024. McLaurin had 82 catches, 1,096 receiving yards, and 13 touchdown grabs. He was the wide receiver 14 in points per game with 15-plus points per game that season. And before that, guys, it was a ton of consistency despite some awful quarterback play. 5 straight seasons with 1,000 receiving yards. And the Washington Commanders rewarded him last offseason with a 3-year, $97 million contract. Now, fast forward to the start of this offseason, Jaden Daniels is healthy, and there's been an offensive coordinator change where David Blau has taken over, and he's saying all of the right things when it comes to McLaurin. McLaurin looks like he's going to be the focal point of this entire offense at the skill positions. Blau said that this thing is going to be built around how to get Terry 10 targets a game and get him explosive reception after explosive reception to flip the field. Healthy Jaden Daniels, Terry McLaurin with no holdout this offseason. He's 31 years old, but there's still plenty of gas left in the tank. He's going off the board as wide receiver 34 in Dynasty startups. I think that's a strong value. And if you take a step back, McLaurin is now chasing the all-time records for the Washington Commanders / Washington Redskins organization. McLaurin is 5th all-time within the organization in receptions. He's 5th in receiving yards, and he's 8th in touchdowns. He's closing in on some really legendary Washington players, and I think when we're all said and done, 2 years from now, he's going to be towards the very top, behind Art Monk in a couple of those categories. So Terry McLaurin, for me, real big bounce-back season for him. Bounce-back season for Daniels as well, but I get that age discount for Terry McLaurin. Jacob, your thoughts on McLaurin?
I'm pretty optimistic about McLaurin this year. I didn't think that I would be initially because kind of a rule that I tend to have that I think has worked out more often than not is whenever one of these post-Apex wide receivers starts to not score points, it usually doesn't bounce back up. That being said, I dug into the numbers a bit last year, and he was one of the highest rated receivers by PFF. He had a 2.22 yards per route run. So the question then just becomes, were the injuries he suffered last year the start of the end for him? And it's just going to be nagging injury after nagging injury, or was it a one-year blip? He's largely been healthy throughout the rest of his career. He was still really efficient and effective when he actually played last season. So overall, I'm pretty optimistic that he's able to bounce back. If we get into the summer and he's nursing something nagging, I'm probably bailing at that point for whatever I can get. But overall, looking to 2026, I still think he can play. And I big agree with what you said about the offensive change. Everything under Cliff Kingsbury was a very spread it out system in terms of just how they were attacking. It was a lot of focus on short area yards after catch stuff, which isn't really McLaurin's specialty or his calling card. If they want to go under center and they want to play more heavy personnel, they want to attack more deep and intermediate areas, you're going to see, I think, a higher concentration of the targets on Terry McLaurin. I think it's a really good fit.
Ryan, a Washington bounce back this year. Are you down with that statement?
Yeah, I can definitely buy into that. And I do think it's not just the age discount that you're kind of getting with McLaurin. It's also just the, hey, he was priced fairly highly last year and had a disappointing season discount. But yeah, as Jacob just kind of laid out, the underlying efficiency was certainly there, especially in context of the quarterback play that they were having to deal with and all of the injuries on that team. As well as we have kind of seen this before where a receiver holds out, misses all of training camp, and then almost immediately they get these nagging injuries that kind of affect them throughout the entire season. That is like not a new thing whatsoever. We've seen several examples of just the extended holdouts kind of derailing a season before. So yeah, I'm pretty optimistic on McLaurin. I think probably like his efficient ADP should be somewhere between where it is right now and where it was last year. I was kind of off of him last year just for efficiency regression stuff. But yeah, I mean, generally he kept up the efficiency outside of the touchdowns and all. So I'm pretty into McLaurin at this current price as well.
And Ryan, you have a wide receiver that's even older than Terry McLaurin. The oldest player that we've talked about yet is your player to acquire this offseason.
I'm into Mike Evans, finally. This is a player that has kind of owned me and shoved me in a locker for a lot of his career, has always kind of exceeded my expectations. The market right now is just delusional about him. He is the current wide receiver 50 on Dynasty Data Lab going in the late 12th. There are all these trades out there that are essentially Mike Evans for a mid to late second round Dynasty rookie pick. At that value, I am in all day. So right now, Evans' 2026 contract is a void year. So the Buccaneers either need to re-sign him or he's going to go sign elsewhere in free agency. From the rumors that we're kind of getting, it sounds like they're probably going to part ways. The Bucs only have less than $20 million in cap space, but Chris Godwin has a $33 million cap hit this year. It seems like they're into all of their younger receivers, Igbuka, of course, but also McMillan, Tez Johnson. These guys have flash, so I think the Buccaneers are going to be comfortable going into 2026 without Mike Evans. And if that's the case, he's very likely going to go somewhere that he can contribute. The rumored landing spots from Matthew Berry's Combine article were the Bills and the Eagles, assuming A.J. Brown gets traded for Mike Evans. Just kind of based off of that, these guys can go one of two ways when they're like shopping free agent destinations later in their careers. It can either be like the Devontae Adams route of I want to be a big part of an offense and I want to chase a ring, or it can be I want to get paid a ton. Evans kind of strikes me more as the former, especially if there's anything to those rumored spots. So I do think wherever he goes, it's going to be somewhere where he can contribute and frankly score a ton of touchdowns. And that's almost all that matters to me with a Mike Evans type. Even if there's going to be target competition or what have you, like I think almost anywhere that is like a good offense where he can have good touchdown equity, he's going to succeed in fantasy football. Our charted separation, average separation score at Fantasy Points data, he was incredible in, second in overall separation score, top 12 versus man, second best versus zone. He was still commanding a ton of volume when he was on the field. The wide receiver 9 by expected fantasy points per game with 16.9 in his games over a 60% route share. Only 12.1 fantasy points per game, but hey, it's a similar story to what we saw with the Emeka Egbuka last year, where for a big chunk of the season, Baker Mayfield was injured and frankly not playing that well for a lot of it. So Evans ended up with the 10th lowest catchable target rate among qualifying wide receivers. Egbuka was the second lowest. So it seems like it was more of a Baker Mayfield thing to me than a Mike Evans is declining and suddenly is not a player that is going to overperform his volume like he has basically every single year of his career, just as this touchdown bloodhound type of player. He was at plus 2.3, plus 0.9 fantasy points over expectation his last 2 seasons. Like, I'm not looking at 2025 with everything that we also saw affect Emeka Egbuka down the stretch and saying, oh yeah, suddenly he's going to be this negative FPOE player. So really, like, the worst thing that can happen with Mike Evans is he like surprisingly stays in Tampa. And even if that's the case, I'm totally comfortable with sending that second round pick for him and what you're likely to get out of it. And kind of like the last nice thing about Mike Evans and acquiring him in Dynasty right now is that more so than a lot of other older players, there's a very good chance that he is not on the roster of a clear contender right now because he was injured for so much of the season. A lot of these teams that have Evans might have been teams that kind of fell short, might not be teams that project super well, that might actually be incentivized to turn over their older players and deal them out to you. So he's one that I am just looking at what roster he's on in every league and kind of sending out that opening offer right now for any teams that I am looking to add cheap wide receiver production to for 2026.
Yeah, I love the take, Ryan. Okay, guys. Well, we've gotten through our players that we've recommended teams acquire, but we haven't mentioned the player that effectively destroyed the AJ Pex a few years back. Derrick Henry gets cheaper and cheaper every year in Dynasty and continues to score at an absurd rate. He's 32 this year, though, guys. Are we in or out on Derrick Henry at 32 years old? Should Dynasty managers be acquiring him or fading him at this time in the offseason? Let's start with you on this one, Jacob.
Yeah, I'm probably acquiring Derrick Henry. My general rule of thumb on these age guys is that I'm probably the low guy on most of them when they are at or around the age apex. I'm probably the high guy on those who survive long enough to be multiple years past the age apex. And that's just because, like I sort of said up top, as long as you still show that you're good, you can sometimes continue to be good for a very long time. It's not a gradual decline. And so when we're dealing with 27-year-olds, I think that the risk is sometimes underpriced in, where people assume, hey, this guy's still got a long way to go. You know, he's not actually that old. It's going to be fine. And sometimes it is. But sometimes the end comes really, really quickly. And if the end does come very quickly, not just through decline in play, but sometimes due to a freak injury, all of a sudden this value that was baking in 3-4 years of expected continued production just evaporates, right? Look how fast it happened to like a Cooper Kupp or a Tyreek Hill, where they almost went from right at the age apex to, whoa, they might not be so good anymore, to they have no fantasy value whatsoever. For some of these guys, however, that are able to continue to where Derrick Henry is at now, you're priced at a level that's basically year to year. So if he does get injured, if this doesn't go well and he looks cooked, you know, you've lost on the investment you made for this year, but you're really only paying a redraft level price for him in Dynasty. You're not paying the price that has any expectation that he's going to be a major factor in 2027, 2028 and beyond. So you can get Derrick Henry right now pretty reasonably for less than a first-round pick. You can get Derrick Henry for significantly lower cost than you can Josh Jacobs or Saquon Barkley, or other running backs that are young, but who also have very uncertain fantasy futures because they haven't proven themselves yet, like a Cam Scatterbu, like an RJ Harvey, etc. So I'm in on Derrick Henry this year. I think he's a priority buy for contenders.
I'm completely in agreement with you, Jacob. I've actually bought him a couple times. You're sometimes shocked by just how cheap it is. You have to understand that you're taking on an asset that at some point is going to head to absolute zero. But this year could be really, really fun. It could be another double-digit touchdown season. In fact, we would probably all bet on him finding the end zone at least 10 times this year. Ryan, where are you at on this one? I know you mentioned Derrick Henry on a previous show. Talk about your enthusiasm for him this offseason.
Yeah, I mean, I talked about him positively on this channel a few weeks back, and it is for similar reasons to what Jacob just laid out. I think especially over the past few years as my dynasty process has evolved, I have kind of transitioned into viewing most running backs as essentially year-to-year bets. And yeah, as a guy gets older and gets further past the age apex, the price just reflects more and more that he is a true one-year bet. And I just think that is about equally true of Derrick Henry as it is of some of these other running backs. Even like your Travis Etienne's, your Saquon Barkley's, like all these guys that are going to be whatever, fringe late first valuations, kind of in that range. The Javonte Williams, like none of these guys are really any safer 2 years out, 3 years out than a Derrick Henry is. He is very likely going to outproduce all of them this year. He did that with all of them last year. So yeah, give me Derrick Henry. Yeah, definitely one of the bigger priorities. If I'm contending, he's one of the first names that I'm searching up and seeing if we can get something done with the roster he's on. He is a harder one to get, though, I will say. He is much more often, much more likely on the rosters that are already totally stacked, that aren't really looking to deal off their older players. That'd be maybe my one caveat, but yeah, generally pretty optimistic on him. Think it makes sense to acquire or be looking to in leagues.
It is absolutely worth an ask. If you want more from Jakob and Ryan, make sure you're subscribed to Dynasty Points podcast anywhere you get your podcasts. And you can find Dynasty Points right here on Fantasy Points Dynasty YouTube. You can also find my Dynasty podcast, Dynasty Life. We have so much planned for this offseason right here at Fantasy Points Dynasty YouTube. We're going to help you crush your Dynasty leagues this season and get you ready for those rookie drafts, which are right around the corner. We'll see you soon.